My name is Daniel Carter, and for most of my life, I believed humiliation was something you could survive as long as you kept your head down. I was wrong. There are some moments that do not simply embarrass you. They carve themselves into your bones. They follow you into every room. They sit beside you at dinner. They whisper to you when you try to sleep. They become the reason you either break or rebuild yourself into someone nobody recognizes. For me, that moment happened at my parents' 25th wedding anniversary dinner. Everyone was there. My parents, my younger sister Emily, my older brother Mark and his wife, my uncles, aunts, cousins, neighbors, church friends, and half the people who had watched me grow up in our small Ohio town. And standing beside me that night was my wife, Rachel. Beautiful, sharp, confident Rachel. The woman I had loved since college. The woman I had worked 2 jobs to support while she finished her master's degree. The woman I had defended when my family called her too ambitious, too cold, too proud. The woman I believed would stand beside me through anything. That night, she stood up in front of everyone, lifted her glass, smiled like she was about to give a loving toast, and destroyed me. She said, "I think everyone here knows Daniel is a good man. A kind man. But kindness does not pay bills. Kindness does not build a future. And sometimes, love is not enough when a man refuses to become more than what he is." The room went quiet. I remember the fork in my mother's hand freezing halfway to her mouth. I remember my father lowering his eyes. I remember my brother Mark smirking like he had been waiting for this. Rachel continued. "I have spent 6 years trying to believe in Daniel. 6 years waiting for him to become the kind of husband I could be proud of. But I am tired of pretending. I am tired of carrying the weight of his failures. And tonight, in front of everyone who loves him, I think it is time he hears the truth." She turned toward me. Her eyes were cold. "Daniel, I am ashamed to be your wife." A sound moved through the room. Not quite a gasp. Not quite a whisper. Something worse. Pity. I sat there with my hands folded on the white tablecloth. My wedding ring pressing into my finger. My throat so tight I could not breathe. Rachel was not finished. She said I lacked ambition. She said I embarrassed her in front of her coworkers. She said she had married potential, not a man who still drove an old truck, wore discount suits, and worked for a small logistics company with no real future. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "I want a divorce." My mother started crying. My father said my name once, quietly, like he wanted to stop the bleeding but did not know where to press. My sister Emily stood up and told Rachel to sit down. But Rachel looked around the room, calm as ever, and said, "I know this is uncomfortable, but maybe Daniel needed to be embarrassed before he finally understood what he has become." Then she walked out. And the worst part was not that my wife humiliated me in front of my entire family. The worst part was that some of them agreed with her. My brother Mark was the first to speak. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, she was harsh. But maybe she had a point." My mother snapped, "Mark." But he shrugged. "What? We have all been thinking it. Daniel is a good guy, sure. But he has been stuck for years." I looked at my father, waiting for him to defend me. He did not. He only stared down at his plate. That silence hurt more than Rachel's words. Because Rachel had chosen to humiliate me, but my family chose to let me sit in it alone. I left the restaurant that night without saying goodbye. I drove for almost 3 hours with no destination. I remember passing dark fields, gas stations, empty roads, and thinking one thing over and over. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really was nothing. When I finally went home, Rachel's closet was already half empty. Her perfume was still in the air. Her wedding photo was still on the dresser. But her suitcase was gone. On the kitchen counter, she had left the divorce papers. No note. No apology. Just her signature already waiting. I sat at that counter until sunrise. At 6 in the morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. I did not answer. Then my father called. Then Emily. Then Mark. Then Rachel. I turned the phone off. For 3 days, I did not speak to anyone. I went to work. I came home. I ate whatever was easiest. I slept badly. I signed where the attorney told me to sign. Rachel did not fight over the house because we did not own one. She did not fight over savings because there was almost nothing to divide. She took the newer car, most of the furniture, and half of what little we had. I let her. Not because I was noble. Because I was tired. 2 weeks after that dinner, Rachel moved to Chicago. 3 months later, I heard she was dating someone named Preston Vale, a partner at the consulting firm where she worked. Rich family, expensive apartment, tailored suits. The kind of man Rachel used to point at in magazines and say, "That is what success looks like." My brother Mark told me by accident. Or maybe not by accident. He called one afternoon and said, "Look, I know things have been rough, but you need to stop ignoring the family." I said nothing. He sighed. "Rachel has moved on. You should too." I asked, "Why are you telling me about Rachel?" He paused, then said, "Because people are talking, Daniel. She is doing well. Really well. And you are still here, acting like a victim." That was the last time I spoke to my brother for a long time. But Emily did not give up on me. She showed up at my apartment one rainy Thursday evening with a paper bag of groceries, and a look on her face like she was ready to kick down the door if I did not open it. When I did, she stepped inside and said, "You look terrible. Nice to see you too." She put the groceries on the counter. "You have lost weight." "I am fine." "No, you are not. But you will be." I laughed once, bitterly. "Everybody seems pretty sure about what I am." Emily looked at me for a long second. Then she said, "Rachel was cruel. Mark is an idiot. Dad was a coward. Mom is a shame." She froze. "But none of that decides who you are." I wanted to believe her. I really did. "But humiliation has a way of making other people's faith sound like charity," I said. She was right about one thing. Emily crossed her arms. "What?" I was stuck. She softened. "Maybe. But being stuck is not the same as being worthless." That sentence saved me more than she ever knew. Because that night, after she left, I opened my laptop. I looked at my bank account, then my resume, then my life. And for the first time since Rachel had walked out, I did not ask why she had done it. I asked what I was going to do next. At the time, I worked for a small logistics company called Benton Freight Solutions. I was an operations coordinator. The title sounded better than the job. Mostly, I managed driver schedules, solved route problems, dealt with angry clients, and fixed mistakes made by people above me who earned twice my salary. But I knew the business. I knew where money was wasted. I knew why shipments were late. I knew which systems were outdated. I knew which clients were ready to leave and why. For years, I had suggested improvements. My boss would nod, say, "Good idea," and then forget it by lunch. So I stopped suggesting. After Rachel left, I started writing everything down. Every inefficiency, every unnecessary cost, every delay pattern, every customer complaint, every solution I had once been too afraid to push. I worked my normal hours, then came home and worked until 2 or 3 in the morning. I taught myself software. I took online courses. I learned supply chain analytics, contract negotiation, basic coding, business finance. I stopped going to family dinners. I stopped checking Rachel's social media. I stopped caring who was laughing. 6 months after the divorce, I took a risk. I asked Benton Freight's owner, Mr. Harold Benton, for a meeting. He was 71 years old, sharp as a blade, and had been running the company since before I was born. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "You have 15 minutes. I placed a folder on his desk. Inside was a plan to cut operating costs by 18% within 1 year. He read the first page, then the second. Then he closed the office door. The meeting lasted 3 hours. 2 weeks later, he gave me permission to test my system on 3 regional clients. Within 4 months, those clients' delivery delays dropped by nearly 40%. Within 8 months, Benton Freight landed 2 new contracts because of the improvements. By the end of the year, Mr. Benton promoted me. Not because he liked me, because I made him money. And for the first time in my life, I understood something. Respect is not always given to the person who deserves it. Sometimes it is given to the person who becomes impossible to ignore. 2 years passed. Then 3. I bought a small house. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, old oak floors, a porch that needed work, and a maple tree in the front yard. I painted the walls myself. I learned to cook. I fixed the porch. I adopted an old golden retriever named Murphy from a shelter because he looked as tired as I felt. Emily visited often. My parents tried. At first, I kept them at a distance. My mother apologized one Sunday afternoon while standing in my kitchen. She said, "I should have said something that night. I was washing a coffee mug." I did not turn around. "Yes," I said. "You should have." She cried quietly. My father apologized differently. He came over with a toolbox and helped me repair the porch railing. We worked for 2 hours in silence before he finally said, "I failed you." I kept sanding the wood. He said, "A father should never let his son be shamed like that." I asked, "Why did you?" His hand tightened around the screwdriver. I was embarrassed. He admitted, "Not by you. By the scene. By the people watching." I froze because I cared more about keeping peace than protecting my own son. That was the first honest thing anyone had said about that night. I forgave my parents slowly, not all at once. Forgiveness is not a light switch. It is more like rebuilding a burned house with whatever materials survived. But Mark never apologized. He said I was too sensitive. He said Rachel's delivery was wrong, but the message was fair. He said everyone needed a wake-up call sometimes. So I let him live in a world where he believed I needed his opinion. I simply removed myself from it. By the 5th year after my divorce, Benton Freight had changed completely. Mr. Benton's health was declining, and his children had no interest in the company. They wanted to sell. A large national firm made an offer. Most employees panicked. I did not. Because I had spent 5 years learning every corner of that business. And quietly, with help from investors I had built relationships with, I made an offer too. It was smaller than the national firm's offer, but I promised Mr. Benton something they could not. I would keep the company alive. I would keep the employees. I would keep his name on the building. He called me into his office one evening. The sun was setting behind him, turning the blinds gold. He said, 10 years ago, you were too quiet. I smiled faintly. I have heard that before. He tapped the contract on his desk. You are not quiet now. I signed the papers 2 weeks later. At 38 years old, I became the majority owner and chief executive officer of Benton Freight Solutions. The local paper ran a small article. Nothing dramatic. No flashy headline. Just a photo of me standing beside Mr. Benton, both of us in suits, shaking hands. That photo changed everything. My phone started ringing. Old classmates. Former coworkers. People who had not remembered my birthday in years. And then, of course, family. My mother cried again, but this time from pride. My father cut the article out and framed it. Emily sent me a text that said, I told you that you would be okay. I was wrong. You are better than okay. Even Mark called. I did not answer. He left a voicemail. Hey, man, saw the article. That is wow. Congratulations. We should grab lunch. I deleted it. I know that sounds cold. But there are people who only recognize your worth after the world puts a price tag on it. That is not love. That is market research. By year 8, Benton Freight had expanded into 3 states. By year 9, we had acquired 2 smaller companies. By year 10, the same man Rachel had once called unambitious was speaking at industry conferences and signing contracts with companies whose names used to intimidate me. I had money now, more than I ever expected. But the strangest thing about success is that it does not feel the way you imagine when you are broken. When you are humiliated, you think success will be loud. You think it will arrive like thunder. You imagine yourself pulling up in an expensive car, watching everyone who doubted you choke on regret. But real success was quieter. It was waking up without shame. It was drinking coffee on my porch while Murphy slept at my feet. It was paying Emily's medical bills when her youngest needed surgery and not telling anyone. It was giving my employees Christmas bonuses large enough to make some of them cry. It was walking into a room and no longer wondering whether I belonged there. That was peace. And then Rachel came back. It happened on a Tuesday morning in October. I remember because the air was cold, and I had spilled coffee on my shirt before an investor call. My assistant, Grace, knocked on my office door. There is someone here to see you. I looked up from my laptop. Do they have an appointment? No. Then schedule them. Grace hesitated. She says her name is Rachel Vale. The room went very still. Not Rachel Carter. Rachel Vale. So she had married him. I leaned back in my chair. For a moment, I was 32 again, sitting at that anniversary dinner while my wife told a room full of people she was ashamed of me. Grace asked, should I tell her you are unavailable? I almost said yes. Then I looked out the glass wall of my office, across the floor of employees moving with purpose, screens glowing, phones ringing, the company I had rebuilt humming around me. I said, give me 5 minutes, then bring her in. When Rachel walked into my office, I barely recognized her. She was still beautiful, but not in the effortless way I remembered. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, her clothes expensive but tired, like armor worn too long. She looked around my office, the framed contracts, the city skyline through the window, the photo of Mr. Benton and me, the shelf of awards I never displayed at home. Then she looked at me. Daniel, Rachel, she smiled, but it trembled. It has been a long time. 10 years. Her eyes flickered. You remember. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, I saw your interview last month. I nodded. You looked good, she said. Confident. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because once, confidence was the thing she accused me of lacking. Now she said it like she had discovered it in me, as if it had not been built from the wreckage she left behind. I asked, why are you here? Rachel folded her hands in her lap. I need your help. There it was. Not I am sorry. Not. What I did was cruel. Not I have thought about that night for 10 years. Just need. I said nothing. She continued. Preston and I are divorcing. I am sorry to hear that. Her mouth tightened. No, you are not. You are right. She looked down. He lost most of his money in a bad investment. Then there were lawsuits. Debt. He started drinking. Things got ugly. I listened without expression. Rachel swallowed. I tried to leave earlier, but everything was tied up. The house, the accounts, the legal fees. I thought I had security, but it was all built on sand. I thought of our old apartment. The divorce papers on the counter. Her saying kindness did not pay bills. I asked again. Why are you here? She took a breath. I am applying for a senior strategy position. The company works with logistics firms. Your recommendation would carry weight. I stared at her. She wanted a recommendation. After 10 years, after destroying me in front of my family, after leaving me with nothing but shame and a signature, she had walked into my office to ask me to lend her the reputation she once said I would never have. I said, no. Her face changed. Just slightly. Like she had expected resistance, but not refusal. Daniel, please. I know this is awkward. Awkward as running into an old neighbor at the grocery store. This is something else. She leaned forward. I know I hurt you. No, I said quietly. You humiliated me. Her eyes filled, but I did not look away. You stood in front of my family and told them you were ashamed to be my wife. You announced our divorce like a public performance. You did not just leave me. You made sure everyone watched you do it. Rachel wiped under one eye. I was angry. You were cruel. I felt trapped, so you set me on fire to keep yourself warm. She flinched. For the first time since she walked into my office, she looked genuinely ashamed. Good. Not because I wanted revenge. Because shame can sometimes be the beginning of truth. She whispered. I have regretted that night for years. I asked, did you regret it when you moved into Preston's apartment? She closed her eyes. Daniel, did you regret it when my brother told me you were doing well and I should stop acting like a victim? Her eyes opened. Mark said that? Yes. I did not know. That does not matter. She started crying then. Quietly at first. Then harder. I made a terrible mistake. I stood and walked to the window. Below us, trucks moved through the yard in clean lines, drivers checking manifests, warehouse doors opening and closing. 10 years of work. 10 years of becoming. Behind me, Rachel said, I thought money would make me safe. I did not turn around. And did it? No. What did it make you? She was quiet. Then she said, lonely. I turned back. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Spiritually. As if the version of Rachel who had once looked down on my life had finally discovered that a pedestal can become a prison if you climb too high and no one follows. She said, I am not asking you to take me back. I know. I am asking for forgiveness. No, I said. You asked for a recommendation. Her face crumpled. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue. The old Rachel would have. She would have sharpened her voice, lifted her chin, turned my refusal into proof that I was bitter. But this Rachel only nodded slowly. You are right. Silence filled the office. Then she said, I am sorry, Daniel. I am sorry for that night. I am sorry for making you feel small, because I was too shallow to understand your worth. I am sorry for measuring you by money, status, clothes, cars, titles, all the things I thought mattered. I am sorry for leaving in the cruelest way possible, because I wanted everyone to believe I was the strong one. Her voice broke. But I was not strong. I was selfish. And I have carried that shame for 10 years. I sat down again. This was the apology I had once dreamed about. There were nights, years earlier, when I had imagined Rachel crawling back, admitting she was wrong, begging me to forgive her. In those fantasies, I always had the perfect speech. Sharp. Devastating. A clean final blow. But real life is not as satisfying as fantasy. Because when someone finally apologizes, truly apologizes, you are forced to face the fact that revenge cannot return the years you lost grieving. I asked, why now? She looked confused. What? Why apologize now? Why not 1 year later? 5 years? Why only after you needed something from me? Her tears stopped. That question landed. She looked at her hands. Because I was ashamed. I waited. And because, she admitted, part of me did not want to know whether you had become happy without me. There it was. The truth. Not complete nobility. Not pure remorse. Something human, messy, selfish, honest. I nodded. I believe you. Hope flashed across her face. But I still cannot recommend you. Her shoulders fell. I understand. No, I said. I do not think you do. A recommendation is trust. And I do not trust you. She absorbed that like a slap. But she did not fight it. I opened my desk drawer and took out a business card. There is a nonprofit downtown that helps professionals rebuild after financial abuse and divorce. I donate to them. They have career counselors, legal referrals, support groups. Call the director. Tell her I sent you. Rachel stared at the card. You would do that? I am not cruel, Rachel, she whispered. I know. No. I said. You did not know. That was the problem. She took the card. Then she stood. For a second, I thought she would leave. Instead, she looked at me with wet eyes and said, Are you happy? 10 years earlier, that question would have broken me. Because back then, my happiness depended on being chosen by someone who did not value me. Now, I thought of my home. My dog. My sisters. Kids. Running across my yard in summer. My parents sitting on my porch, older and softer now. My employees. My quiet mornings. My life. Yes, I said. I am. Rachel nodded like the answer hurt and healed her at the same time. I am glad, she said. Then she left. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. 2 weeks later, my mother called. Her voice was careful. Daniel? Rachel reached out to me. I closed my eyes. What did she want? To apologize. That surprised me. She asked if she could come by. Your father and I said yes. I waited for anger. It did not come. My mother continued. She cried. She apologized for what she did at the anniversary dinner. She said she had no excuse. What did Dad say? My mother gave a small laugh. You know your father. He asked if she wanted coffee. I smiled despite myself. Then she said, Mark was there. My smile disappeared. Why? He stopped by unexpectedly. Of course he did. And? Mother sighed. He told Rachel she should not beat herself up, because everyone knew you needed a push. I felt something cold move through me. What did Rachel say? My mother paused. She told him to stop using her cruelty as cover for his own. I opened my eyes. She said that? Yes. What did Mark do? He left. For the first time in years, I wished I had seen Rachel. Not because I loved her. Because maybe accountability had finally found the right address. A month later, Mark came to my office. Unlike Rachel, he did not get past the lobby. Grace called up and said, Your brother is here. I looked through the glass toward the elevator. There he was. Mark Carter. Expensive watch. Confident posture. Same smirk. He had always been the golden son. Star athlete. Charming. Loud. The kind of man people forgave before he apologized, because they wanted to stay in his orbit. He worked in commercial real estate and had done well for a while. But I had heard from Emily that his business was struggling. So when Grace asked if I wanted to see him, I knew exactly why he was there. I said, Send him up. Mark entered my office with open arms. Look at you, he said. Chief Executive Officer. Big desk. Big view. I always knew you had it in you. No, you did not. His arms dropped. He laughed awkwardly. Come on, man. That was a long time ago. Yes, you are still mad? I leaned back. What do you need? Mark's smile tightened. Straight to business? You did not come here to reminisce. He sat without being invited. I have a development deal. Warehousing space. Distribution potential. With your company expanding, we could both make a lot of money. He slid a folder across my desk. I did not open it. He said, At least look. No. His jaw shifted. You do not even know what it is. I know who it is from. Mark stared at me. Then the mask cracked. There it is. Still playing the wounded victim. I felt strangely calm. 10 years earlier, those words would have cut me. Now, they sounded like a child throwing stones at a brick wall. I said, You watched my wife humiliate me, and decided the problem was that I was hurt by it. He rolled his eyes. She said what everyone was thinking. No, Mark. She said what you enjoyed hearing. His face reddened. You think you are better than me now because you have money? No. I think I am better than the man I used to be because I no longer need people like you to approve of me. He stood. You know, Rachel was right about one thing. You were always weak. I smiled. Maybe. But you came to the weak man asking for money. That shut him up. He grabbed his folder. At the door, he turned back. One day you are going to need family. I said, I have family. You are just related to me. He left. And I never regretted it. The following spring, my parents hosted another anniversary dinner. Their 35th. Smaller this time. No neighbors. No church friends. No distant cousins looking for gossip. Just family. My parents, Emily and her husband, their kids, me, and reluctantly, Mark. I almost did not go when I heard he would be there. But my mother asked me quietly, Please do not let what happened 10 years ago steal another dinner from us. So I went. The restaurant was different. The table was smaller. My father moved slower now. My mother's hair had more silver. Emily's kids were old enough to ask embarrassing questions at full volume. For most of the evening, everything was peaceful. Then, my father stood to give a toast. He lifted his glass with both hands. I have been married to this woman for 35 years, he said, looking at my mother. And I have learned many things. But one of the hardest lessons I learned as a husband and father is that silence can wound as deeply as words. The table went still. My father looked at me. 10 years ago, at our anniversary dinner, my son Daniel was hurt in front of us. And I did not defend him. I have apologized privately. But tonight I want to say publicly that I was wrong. My throat tightened. My mother was crying. Emily reached for my hand under the table. My father continued, Daniel, I am proud of the man you are. Not because of your success. Not because of your company. But because you became strong without becoming cruel. I looked down. For years, I had wanted someone to undo that night. No one could. But this was the closest thing. Then, to my surprise, Mark scoffed. Softly. But everyone heard it. Emily snapped. Do not. Mark leaned back. What? Are we doing a group therapy session now? My father turned to him. No. We are doing what we should have done 10 years ago. Mark's face hardened. My mother said, enough, Mark. And for once, nobody laughed it off, nobody smoothed it over. Nobody protected him from the consequences of his own mouth. He stood, threw his napkin onto the table, and left. The door closed behind him. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my little niece Lily, who was 7, whispered loudly, Uncle Mark is dramatic. Emily choked on her water. And somehow, the whole table started laughing. Not because everything was fixed, because it no longer controlled us. Later that night, I stepped outside the restaurant. The air was cool, and the parking lot lights buzzed overhead. My father came out and stood beside me. You okay? He asked. Yes. He nodded. I meant what I said. I know. He looked older than I remembered him being 10 years ago. Or maybe I was finally old enough to see him clearly. He said, I used to think protecting family meant avoiding conflict. And now? Now I think avoiding conflict is how families rot from the inside. We stood quietly. Then he asked, did Rachel ever get back on her feet? I nodded. She did. The nonprofit helped her find a role. Smaller company. Less glamorous. Honest work. You keep in touch? No. Good, he said. I laughed. My father smiled. Then he put a hand on my shoulder. Not a dramatic hug. Not a movie moment. Just a father's hand. Steady. Late that night, when I got home, Murphy was waiting by the door, tail thumping against the wall like I had been gone for years instead of hours. I changed out of my suit, poured a glass of water, and stood in my quiet kitchen. For some reason, I thought about the apartment from 10 years earlier, the divorce papers, the silence, the shame. The man I had been, sitting alone at sunrise, believing his life had ended because one woman had declared him unworthy. I wish I could go back and sit beside him. I wish I could tell him that one day, the same people who watched him fall would watch him rise. But more importantly, I would tell him that rising was not about making them regret it. It was about learning to stop measuring himself through their eyes. Rachel humiliated me in front of my family. For years, I thought the wound came from her words. But I was wrong. The deepest wound came from believing her. The healing began the day I stopped. 10 years later, she begged for my forgiveness. And I gave it to her. Not because she deserved to erase what happened. Not because I wanted her back. Not because forgiveness made us friends. I forgave her, because I was tired of carrying a version of myself that no longer existed. But I did not give her access to my life. That is the part people often misunderstand. Forgiveness does not mean reopening the door. Sometimes forgiveness means locking it gently and walking away without hate. Rachel went on with her life. Mark went on blaming everyone else for his. My parents and I rebuilt what we could. Emily remained the one person who had loved me before I became impressive. And me? I kept living. Not loudly. Not bitterly. Not to prove a point. I lived in a way that made that night smaller every year. Until eventually, it became just one chapter, not the whole story. And if there is one thing I learned from losing everything in front of everyone, it is this. The people who humiliate you are not always your enemies. Sometimes they are the mirror that finally shows you the life you were too afraid to outgrow. But once you outgrow it, do not crawl back into the frame just because they finally see your value. Because the strongest revenge is not making them beg. It is becoming so whole that their apology no longer decides whether you are free. And I was free.